What makes a RPG a true success? What parameters must be taken into consideration so that we can find the greatest roleplay experience in a video game? There are many parameters that at the same time they split into more objectives to reach. Do you want to know how? Follow this video in order to know how our RPG should be. In many modern video games, the maps are auto-generated by the engine. This of course involves in one way having a world easy to build for the developers, but at the same time we will have the risk on getting into a world too much cold and mechanical, without having the opportunity to see unique locations. If we think about Bethesda games, we can notice the monotony of the game maps, which present flat scenarios and sometimes they are even boring. The secret on creating a map that will have unique locations that will eventually be remembered after 10 years is to create variety inside the world. What does it mean? It means that every part of the map must be handcrafted with different kinds of landscapes that must be coherent with each other and with the lore of the game, in order to make the player feel like home after a while. If we think about games like Fallout 2 or Gothic 2, we can find this kind of experience. This brings to the creation of unique locations that will require, of course, a careful and meticulous architectural and stylistic construction of towns and villages, or just simply open country areas. An handcrafted world instead of a world generated by the engine makes the entire experience more immersive, thanks to the map that looks alive, open to every social and explorative experience. Exploration is not equal to find meaningless locations and meaningless items like it happens in games like Skyrim. Explore means seeking the meaning of the world game where we are thrown into. Being conscious of the fact that we are in a real world and not in a sandbox that gives everything to the player. Instead, the player should open the world hour after hour. Of course, all of this can't exist without side quests. The side quests should present certain parameters like a detailed story writing which reflects the lore of the story through high quality dialogues. This contributes on creating a world that feels alive. The first example that comes to mind is Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. It's true that every time you mention this game, at some point something is triggered in the mind of an old school player, the enthusiasm that he felt when he played this magnificent RPG. The protagonist should be charismatic or empathize, or at least convincing, and not just a stupid empty avatar. The dialogues of the protagonist should reflect his nature in every choice he makes, creating at some point a deep protagonist who is either good or evil, but at the other hand complex and perfectly coherent with the player choices without being forced in the end. The protagonist must have a motivation at the beginning of the game, not necessarily explicated and maybe brought by the main quests, but it's alright. This is what moves the player at first, and after the character will eventually evolve into something bigger and bigger. Impersonate a living protagonist helps to engage the player himself to feel of being him in the end, just like in Mass Effect or The Witcher 3. NPCs, on the other hand, must not be quest dispensers, but rather must have a deep personality in storytelling. If we think about Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, the characters are written so in detail, almost like entirely by different writers. We can also mention The Witcher 3 and Mass Effect, of course. You have to spend a lot of time in creating the NPCs, giving them a purpose, a definite place in the game world, a story which must be interesting as the story of the protagonist, present and never dull. We just take The Witcher 3 as an example. The uniqueness must be guided by a deep and extreme sense by the player, of course, that the NPC that stands in front of him is a real person. This obviously contributes on creating a living world. The side quests are optional, but only creating standalone quests will result in creating a linear experience and eventually a boring game. See Skyrim and the total lack of influence of the side quests on the main one. Side quests must be linked to the main quest. The main quest needs to the completion of the game. It is able to influence the world itself if necessary, just like the side quests, but these ones are the extension of the main quest, which reflects the world changes. See New Vegas or The Witcher 3. The side quests should be essential for the continuation of the game. Need to level up, to learn useful things, to find or receive powerful items as rewards, just like in Gothic 2. They must be made in a way that without them the player cannot move forward in the main quest, since this one requires resources, experience and objects that the character must absolutely obtain. There is no need for a game to help the player with maps implemented on the screen or targets showing the points of interest or quest marks to be reached with instant travel. All these aids damage the atmosphere of the game and eliminate the magic which a vast and free world creates through exploration. In principle, these aids are a mistake, and it's a bad policy spread in most of the modern RPGs and in most of the modern open world games. Their sole purpose is to embrace a greater number of players too much impatient to play. The maps might be useful for orientation, but these will never indicate the road to the quests, because the character actually doesn't even know the place or the guy who he have to meet. Maps and teleports, however, can be purchased or obtained at some point in the game. The quests also have to be in proportion with the size of the world map. If we have a world map like Fallout or Two Worlds 2, we absolutely have to find a lot of quests. Or small maps like Risen 1, we have to find a few quests, all in proportion with the population, but of course they must present the parameters that we have already explained. And for example, the structure of the quests. The side quests must have an irregular structure. An NPC called A wants an item that the NPC called B possesses, and we are recruited to deliver it to A. A wants the item at all costs without caring too much on how the character is gonna take it. But the NPC B, to make sure that he gives us the item, he also wants from another NPC called C a further item. This will be a one way to achieve the objective. The quest must have a multitude of solutions. The more they are, the better. We could steal the item, convincing B to give it to us by using force, buying it, or even get it through various passive abilities that unlock more lines of dialogues with manipulations or seduction if we think about vampire. Or for example, we can get the same item from an NPC called D, or even find it randomly in the world and keep it for ourselves in the end. If we paid attention, A didn't actually say to the character that he wants the item from B because he doesn't care on how it is obtained. And here's how the endless solutions are proposed to the player. However, the player must not be aware of his choices. The solutions must be discovered by the player alone only if he pays attention on what is told. That's how the player will have a full vision of the quest that will eventually be replayable in future games. After he made a choice that does not openly report the possible consequences to the player, in fact the player choices must be instinctive, which means that they will lead to unforeseen consequences, because this will scare the player every time that he will have to do some decisions. If we think of titles like Mass Effect or The Witcher, we have a clear vision on what is right and what is wrong, but the consequences reflect perfectly the choices. All these elements must be fused together in some kind of puzzle. The important thing is the setting that should not sacrifice an RPG element, as the plot for example, for a larger amount of side quests, or a complex storyline for a small amount of side quests. Quality and balance is important. Now let's talk about the gameplay. Everything depends on the type of game that we are talking about. Action RPGs or FPS RPGs or isometric RPGs. The important thing is to maintain a balance between quests and combat. This must be mathematically be balanced in order to give the player a fair experience. In many modern video games, the term difficulty has lost its true meaning. Today, RPGs, especially the action RPGs, are focusing more and more on basic mechanics in order to embrace basic skills players. Although the NPCs can one-shot the character, but this certainly makes a little angry those who want a challenging game that brings strong NPCs, yes, but also particular combat mechanics in order to give more space to the player's skills. A fair RPG should not have a difficulty system like Halo, where it is true that the NPCs can instantly kill the player, but on the other hand, there are basic combat mechanics. The most effective comparison is to compare the same Halo with Quake 3 or Counter-Strike with Call of Duty. They are on two different levels of difficulties, so how can we make a complex game? The combat system is the secondary heart of the RPG. The goal of the combat system is to propose NPCs of difficult solution but not impossible. If the player is not strong enough to defeat an opponent, then he must necessarily prepare both the character and himself in terms of skills and in terms of tactics. When both the character becomes stronger and the player becomes more experienced with the game mechanics, facing an opponent who he believed to be God and actually beat the crap out of him, this gives him a great sense of satisfaction. We have so many types of combat system. For example, the turn-based combat like Wasteland or Fallout 2, it doesn't matter. What is important that in every combat system there should not be any help but the game. An RPG combat must have mechanics that gives the player a need to calculate the moves of the opponent and strike at the right time at the weak points. First of all, we take a look at the best combat systems. Dark Souls is probably the only game that features slow mechanics in these days. Too bad it's not a real RPG, but rather a combat simulator. Reason 1, which presents a system based on 1 versus 1, where there are many combinations and moves freely used by the player in order to have a particular style of fighting. Another example is Fallout New Vegas, which is expressed with a good FPS combat system without making it so real. Pillars of Eternity, that is very tactical, or for example Deus Ex, especially the new ones, which consist in a challenging stealth combat system. Instead, the worst fighting system in the RPG genre of Skyrim, Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. Because these combat systems are based on a pure concept of click every attack button and pray. Unfortunately, a combat system is nothing without the passive skills and talents. We have first of all the skill tree. We think of Pillars of Eternity, which has a skill tree where every individual skill have always a direct connection with the others. Also, the skills must be always balanced with some bonuses and malices in order to give the player the possibility to create an original character, limited only by his imagination. To give an example, we must consider Path of Exile, which is an hack-and-slash MMO that has perhaps the world's greatest skill tree structure of all time. As for the context of the skill, this depends on the concept of the game. If you look at Deus Ex, we find skills that are related to hacking or firearms, while at the same time, if we look at The Witcher 3, we have, for example, swords and alchemy. How to get the skills? Leaving us free to unlock skills by using skills points after making the level up is not that accurate. Instead, if we make the acquisition more realistic, we have to take inspiration from Gothic and Skyrim. In these cases, the skills are obtained through teachers or by the use of the skill over the time that eventually will increase. Realistically, to learn how to fight we need of a teacher first, but The constant use of the skills are also right. Every game, to be as such, should have its own identity and not be a copy and paste. Well, you can repeat the same mechanics only if you improve them. Innovation is proposing new and interesting game approaches and game concepts like ELEX. It's not a shame proposing old design mechanics such as stealth. Every game has its own stealth mode, and yet each is done differently even if it's always the same, right? However, the greatest stealth game is the Deus Ex series. This video might explain the reasons why old RPGs are better than the new ones, but it's not that accurate. We could do some honorable mentions like Fallout New Vegas, which is a perfect balance between old and new school, The Witcher 3, who has the best character and story alongside with Mass Effect, Dragon Age, Two Worlds 2, Resident 3, Wasteland 2. They are good games, but we cannot deny the feeling that these games have only one RPG element developed. These games are trying to be everything but master of only one thing in the end. Anyway, so what do you think on how an RPG should be? Comment below, let us know. We shall meet again.